Okay, that's recording there. And yeah, we will have questions afterwards or comments afterwards. You can put these into chat or you can put them in the Q&A and I will get to them afterwards. So we'll have about 10 minutes at the end of questions. Okay. So yeah, I give you over to Claire Nolan.
Hi everyone. Thanks, Mary. Thanks for your introduction and thanks for having me here today. So yeah, I'll talk about archaeology and wellbeing, or wellbeing in the historic environment, but I'll kind of go into the general background of archaeology and heritage and wellbeing studies so far, mainly within the UK, because that's where it's all seems to be happening right now. But also beyond as well. And then I'll talk about some of the kind of the issues around, definitions of well-being, all that kind of stuff. And then I'll talk about my own research, actually, just to drill down in a bit deeper into kind of what it is about archaeology and heritage that supports well-being. So yeah, so if I start from the beginning, I think it's fair to say that this field really started to take off with the heritage and health work that was done in UCL, in University College London, mainly in museums, or rather bringing heritage objects from museums into healthcare settings, so with inpatient care and outpatient care. And these projects seem to work really well. And one in particular that I'm always talking about, because I just think it's so amazing, is a project done with some women who were diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And they were allowed to handle the objects and speak with the nurse and the facilitator about, what it meant to them. And you can see there in front of you this Egyptian cat figurine, which it's holding kittens and a bunch of other things, but the women were able to get really have a deeply therapeutic experience in that they were able to relate to this object, partly in relation to the maternal kind of symbolism and how that related to their issues, but also in relation to time and where they were in time and in the time of their life. And so for many of the women in this study, they were able to kind of make meaning from their illness, it was a really powerful project. So that's just a taste of the kind of work that that started out really and is still ongoing as well. And since then, there's been an explosion of projects. These are, I think, mostly archaeological ones. So lots of work done on archaeological excavations with people living with mental health issues. You can see The Broken Pots, Mending Lives is a book on the work carried out by Operation Nightingale in the UK, which was done with ex-service people and veterans, returning from war and in all sorts of post-traumatic states or physical disabilities, and how digging for them has been really really supportive, really rehabilitative, and quite life-changing actually for some of the people engaged. There's been work done out in Cyprus, and also you can see there some work that's this book is about to come out on how people have kind of sought healing through connecting with lost heritage, or a creative kind of representation of lost heritage in post-conflict situations. And then also there's been work done with Indigenous people in Canada and out in Australia, and that has also been really therapeutic for those people to connect essentially with their ancestors. These are only just a handful of projects that are out there, and there's been a bunch of reports and books. So these particular volumes are quite useful in that they bring a lot of that work that's been done together and kind of gives you an idea of the range of work that's out there. And heritage has now become so good for you, apparently, that you can actually get prescribed you can prescribed visits or kind of volunteering work, group work at sites, but archaeology is a popular one, so actual archaeological excavation. So that's quite a new thing, but you would essentially go to your GP and they will say, oh well, your issue might benefit from being on an archaeological excavation for a week. And I know there's probably some of you in the room who already can attest to that. So a few years ago, some of us got together and we did a Historic England report to look at, it was the very beginning to look at what work was out there, and where things needed to go and what questions needed to be answered. And we had a stab at like working out, what were the different kind of avenues to well-being? What were the different ways that heritage and archaeology support well-being? So you can see the first one there, volunteering. There's a lot of heritage-based volunteering in England, and that has been very has been really good for people's well-being in that it brings people together. It helps people to develop social networks, new skills, and self-esteem because of that. And then visiting sites has also been shown to bring out positive feelings for people. So I think that is probably the thing that we do the most here, maybe. So in terms of Ireland, it's worth looking at that further, I think. And then coming back to this idea of social interaction, like heritage as a mechanism for bringing people together around a common interest, so if you're engaged in an archaeological excavation or if you're doing reminiscence work, it can be really powerful for people. The therapeutic side, you kind of got an idea of that from the work from UCL I was talking about. So it's just that bit deeper in terms of the kind of transformation that it can enable for people. And then again, another area I think that is really kind of appropriate for Bur and Bio's work, especially around the place-based learning, is sense of place and belonging, and again, something that I think we all have experienced. And then the more obvious one of just being outdoors, whether you're digging or you're walking or and you're just out in the fresh air, in the historic environment. So that is obviously a positive one as well. So these are kind of the main routes that we identified. But there's still been questions around, well, what is it about heritage and archaeology? What is it about the assets themselves even that bring about well-being? Would you still have well-being if you just, the same kind of well-being if you just went and did an outdoor activity that didn't have heritage connected to it? So this is something that we're still trying to answer, really. And it's something that I was really, really interested in. So when I was doing my project in the UK, I went to Wiltshire. I'm sure you're all very familiar with Stonehenge. So I did use Stonehenge as one of the case studies, but also Avebury, which is about 40 kilometers to the north. It's another henge. And then the Vale of Pewsey, which also has a henge, another one that you may not have heard of, in the middle, as well as a bunch of other monuments. So we have them here. So Mardenhenge is the henge that's in the Vale of Pewsey. That's on the left. It's actually the largest henge monument in the UK. Stonehenge, you can see in the middle. And then Avebury is another gigantic henge. It's about 420 meters across. There's actually a village in the middle of it. So that's quite a dramatic sight, and actually, I hate to say it, more exciting than Stonehenge. If you haven't been to it, I highly recommend it. So these are those henges are the kind of modern day focal points of those landscapes, but they're just one part of much larger heritage landscapes. Now, I focus mainly on prehistoric sites and monuments, but they are obviously multi-period landscapes. And these are just some of the other monuments that are in the Stonehenge landscape. So you have Cursus monument there. You've got barrow mounds, so burial mounds. You've got timber enclosures. And the top right there is an excavation of a Mesolithic occupation site. And then you have Durrington Walls, which is another large henge enclosure on the top left there. These are some of the other monuments in the Avebury landscape. So you have top left, you've got West Kennet Long Barrow, which is another a burial mound. And you have another round barrow there as well. And Silbury Hill on the bottom left, which is the largest man-made mound in Europe. And nobody really knows what it's for. And then in the Vale of Pusey, similar kinds of things. You've got burial mounds, Iron Age enclosures, and causewayed enclosures, so early Neolithic kind of gathering sites. So there was a whole range of, I picked these kind of landscapes because they had so many visible, well-preserved standing remains, but they're also excavated in as well. So there was that depth to them also. And I interviewed people who lived around the sites, and I also I took out 3 different groups out to walk in the Avebury landscape. So kind of in an experiential way. And again, this reminds me a lot of the Burn Bio, the place-based learning approach. So really kind of slowing down and thinking about, how do I connect with this landscape and what does that mean to me? What do I think about it? Or for some people who had never been there before, what do I even think about this in the first place? So these were some of the kind of prompts I had for people. Really was, how do you interact with this site on a daily basis? I mean, people drive past them every day, and I'm sure many of you can relate to this in your own landscape, that I think sometimes we can take these places for granted because we're just passing through all the time, or we might have grown up there, or if you're in a new landscape, you take more notice of these things because it's kind of more exciting. So yeah, just got people sort of thinking, really reflecting inwardly about what came to mind around these sites, and what they experience. And I also asked or invited people to keep a kind of a journal before the interviews and during the walks. People were invited to take pictures, and so some people did, and that was quite, I think it was quite illuminating for people, for themselves, to actually keep that record and in a way that they hadn't done before. So these were just some of the images that the residents had taken of the area, and that they used as kind of talking points in our discussions. And there are a couple of photos from the visitor perspectives as well. And so after, I actually forgot to say, so we, with the groups that I took out, we went on our walk, and everyone kind of tuned in, and then we all sat down and had a recorded conversation about what came up for people, and we did that in the landscape, so it was even more kind of immediate. So the themes that have sort of come up, these are the lots of different themes came up, but these were the ones that came up most for the majority of people. So I will delve into them a bit more deeply now, and I'll use some quotes as well. But when I'm talking about existential well-being, I suppose it's kind of themes around time, identity, place, sense of connection, all these kinds of things that came up time and time again for people. So with this idea of security, there was, this, I think, something about the scale of some of these monuments and sites that that you could go inside them and just feel safe away from the modern world. And also this idea that, they've been there for thousands of years, they're still there. And I think for some people, actually, interestingly, the interviews were undertaken just after the Brexit vote had happened. So I think people were feeling a bit kind of destabilized, and there was something about connecting to monuments that was, at least there was one sure thing they had, you know, that would ground them. Um, so for other people, there was definitely a sense of peace came up a lot for people, that there was something welcoming, calming about some of these sites, particularly henge enclosures and stone circles. Then back to this idea of stability and kind of thinking about, you know, how we live our lives, and that actually, you know, these monuments are here longer than us, and this, yeah, created feelings of belonging and comfort for people. And then the third quote there about Martin's owl, Iron Age enclosure, which is, you can see there up on the hill. There, the guy talking about this was saying, you know, he felt almost like he was time traveling, and that was something as well that people spoke about a lot. So there was a lot about the time depth of these places, and I think although you can experience that, and people do experience it at more recent sites, there's something even more powerful about the, you know, the older sites, and their ability to transport you. And then just this, the last quote there, this feeling of just being a part of that whole landscape, and that journey through time within that landscape was very grounding for people. So with the connections, so I think perhaps I'm sure people in the chat, in the room today, have had that feeling of, you know, you pick up an artifact, or you've touched, you know, something that's been in the ground that nobody else has touched for thousands of years since it was deposited there. It's just an amazing feeling, and that was definitely something that came up for people. And even I think, you know, people were saying just touching even a standing stone, that, you know, people have touched that kind of monument or artifact over thousands of years, and some people were saying it was like, it was, well, I think actually he says it here, it's like shaking hands with my ancestors. Yeah, somebody else was saying the same thing, that she felt like she was touching the ancestors. And I think when they say the ancestors, they just mean past peoples within that area, they're not direct ancestors. So for that guy, the top quote there, it kind of just opened up his whole world in terms of the landscape. He'd moved there, and he just became much more engaged in it, and this became kind of a hobby for him. And then this feeling of being held. So I was talking about the protective feeling people have in, especially in circular monuments, that, you know, you're physically contained, but also I think there's this feeling of being kind of supported or held by the resonance of past people as well. There's something comforting about knowing that people have been in a place for a long, long time. And connected to that was this feeling that actually some people were saying the monuments themselves felt like members of the community, that, you know, especially in a kind of isolated rural place, that they brought a kind of a comfort through their presence. And for some people, they would like kind of say hello to them on the way to work every day. And these are like very normal, grounded people, you know, and it was just, just seemed to be meaningful for quite a lot of people. So, excuse me. So I think this idea of, you know, being part of the landscape through time, and feeling that you're like the next tenant in the landscape, that you're the next caretaker, and that you're part of a long line of people who have managed and cared for this land, or destroyed it in some cases. But, you know, I think they were looking at it from a more positive angle, especially where, if monuments have survived, obviously the landscape has kind of been looked after, and maybe that's the case for more ceremonial places. And then for others, there was definitely this feeling of, you know, again, I think it happened at all of them, but I think for some people, henges, so I know with Avebury Henge and Stonehenge, people felt that they could go there to kind of connect with something greater than themselves. Some people would go there to speak to loved ones. I know some people have also spread ashes, even though they're not supposed to on archaeological sites, but they'd spread ashes of loved ones. And yeah, very much a place to go and kind of think and reflect. But the other aspect of this, connecting to something greater than oneself. So I think it's connecting to people of the past, it's connecting to the landscape, but also in places where, like Stonehenge, where we know that there is an astronomical alignment, people felt connected to the cosmos and to, to things like that. So, and then you have other people kind of going there to maybe speak to their god or whatever. So there was all these kind of larger things that people felt connected to through the archaeology. And then when this idea of possibility is really, I think I've touched on it a bit. Like you can see the top quote there, a woman saying that when she looks at the site, she just imagines what it was like in the past, and it kind of transports her to this imaginative, creative place. And also helps her to see her landscape differently. And that was a lady who was brought up in that landscape. So I think that's quite a powerful thing when, if you're somewhere for a long, long time. I don't think she ever even left really. She didn't travel much either, and that she can still find new things within the landscape, to strengthen that sense of place and connection. And for others, it was the questioning that it brought around, is the kind of questioning that comes with archaeological excavation, or just, once you know that there are things beneath the ground, or that, this place was very different in the past, you start to think more about, how else were things different? And I think it stimulates this kind of conceptual thought. And then for others, so I've used this image of the West Kennet Avenue, which leads from Avebury Stone Circle all the way down to another site called the Sanctuary. And I think it's about gosh, I can't remember. I think it's about a couple of kilometers long at least. So it's a bit of a journey, and people definitely had a sense of like pilgrimage at these places. And it wasn't just about, that's kind of an obvious pilgrimage journey, but, I think people just visiting sites felt that they were on a sort of pilgrimage as well. And then this back to this idea of, people will go to these landscapes and sites just to go and sit and think about things and work things out. So when I talk about possibility, I mean, in this case, a lot of people said, when I went there, I went there with a problem, and when I left, I had solved the problem. and they kind of thought, well, they weren't sure what it is about the place, that there's just something, that it's a kind of transitional place. It's this other place you can go to and use it for these sorts of things. And then this last quote here about, kind of the perspective on time that you get, and being able to step back and go, oh gosh, like, let's just stop worrying. We're only a drop in the ocean here. But on the flip side of that, other people were like, oh, we're only here for a short space of time, and it's made me think about this, and it's given me a sense of purpose to make, the small bit of time that I have worth it. And lots of things came up around that. There were other conversations about mortality as well, about just people, the monuments being kind of almost like, I don't know, markers, grave markers. People got into deep conversations around that. How did past peoples deal with death? Because they had these giant monuments like West Kennet Long Barrow, and then reflecting on how, well, actually, maybe we don't deal with death so well, today, and that these monuments and these landscapes can help us think about how we might do that better. And some other areas that came up were, and some of this was with slightly rose-tinted spectacles, that people had a simpler life back then. In one way, maybe they didn't have technology like we have, but obviously it was it was probably very hard, and I'm sure it wasn't. It was probably no more simpler in a different kind of way. So, but that was the kind of the thing that people were projecting on the past. And but then for others, it was just there's something around connecting with origins that was very grounding for them. And also this feeling that people were more directly connected to the natural world. So as you can see in the last quote there, the person who said that is quite realistic about the fact that, you know, they were probably no more sustainable than we are proportionately. But at the same time, they were more directly connected to the elements. And maybe that is something it's something that the people I was speaking to kind of were craving, I think. So that was interesting. And I think they felt grounded even just engaging with those ideas. So I think that for me, and this comes back to place-based learning approaches again, I think the reason that the responses were so rich is because people were given the time to reflect deeply. And in some cases, they were given time to reflect over a few weeks beforehand as well. And, you know, kind of, I mean, one person made a real project out of it, and he went around taking pictures, and you went to the sites, kind of revisited sites, and wrote very thoughtfully about them and about his past relationships with them and the present as well. So he actually found the process of even doing this was quite therapeutic for him. And you can see some of the quotes there. People were saying similar sorts of things, that they now appreciate their landscape even more. So that was a really a nice kind of outcome from the work. But I think it's something to underscore. I think if you're facilitating heritage and wellbeing work, I think reflection needs to be a big part of that. But also, if you're just, I think a lot of people do it anyway themselves. I know I was doing it before I started the project on some level, and I've no doubt people here do it as well. It's just, if you don't do it, it's a really nice thing to do, you know. So these are kind of some of the when we're trying to think about what it is about engagement with heritage assets themselves that support wellbeing. These are some of the ideas that I've had from that work. And it seems to me that it is the age, the form, and the stories attached to these sites. So whether those are stories are based in whether they're archaeological narratives or whether they're narratives that people have projected onto them, they're still meaningful for people. So I think it's a combination of all these different themes that influences how people connect with the landscape and with time and place. And then that, you know, in turn supports them to reflect and make meaning from that experience. And that's where the well-being comes from. So it's a working theory at the moment. But it's all well and good to say that these are amazing places and that heritage is so good for you and la la la. But there's a caveat as well that, you know, there are darker narratives of certain sites. At this site here, I think there's a child burial. Now we don't know if it was slain as a sacrifice. Like, it may have been totally different circumstances, but that's it's still something to think about, that if we are engaging with these places or for support, well, more so for supporting other people to engage them in a therapeutic way, we need to be aware of the narratives of the site and whether they might be triggering, or, you know, or can they be used to work through deeper issues. So that's on a much deeper level if you are working at that level. But there are difficult heritages, you know, surrounding sites. These are just some examples. You have the site of the Nuremberg rallies, which is still a very difficult place. There is a museum there, but I think many of the local people prefer not to even recognize that it's there. You have the archaeology of the Troubles. And this was the work by Laura McAtackney, where she's tried to engage people with narratives around the Maze prison, and some people just can't go there. And then with Corinne Fowler's work, now that's based in the UK, but at the same time, we have sites of that have maybe been built through colonialism and through the slave trade. And so, you know, every site is not this lovely, fluffy, happy heritage place. So there's been some amazing work done by colleagues in the University of Winchester, which was done. These guidelines were put together based on the comments of professionals, on people with lived experience of mental health issues, on health professionals, all together to come out with, you know, well, when you are involving people in heritage project, especially on an archaeological site, you know, if they have trauma, how do you work with that safely, and how do you enable them to still, you know, derive enjoyment and meaning from the work without being triggered. So I think if anyone is planning to do any of this kind of work with other people, then absolutely check this out. It's all available for free online. And yeah, and it's useful for, it would be useful for projects. These are past projects now. This one up in, excuse me, that was carried out up in Dunluce Castle was done with groups, different sides of the community. So Protestant, Catholic, both of which felt that they had the political claim to, or the historic claim to this castle. And the excavation was done, and they found during the excavation that actually it clarified that both communities in the past had connection with this site, and that it was part of both of their heritages. And through that, as far as I know from reading the paper, that people on either side ended up becoming friends and staying friends after the project was complete. So this is more kind of community well-being, I suppose, that can be derived through this kind of work. And then you have the work that's done with geophysics over in Canada, where I'm sure some of you have heard about the unmarked graves of Indigenous children that were buried at residential schools, and kind of it was all sort of hushed up, but then the grave started to be discovered, and this lady Keisha Supernant, who's also Indigenous herself, is going out to communities, going out to these sites and locating the graves and helping these communities. It's very difficult work, and it's very painful for the communities, but it's also very healing as well. So it just shows the power that archaeology has to heal, especially even when there's difficult heritage, you know. So that's kind of it. I think I've flown through that a little bit. I didn't mean to go so fast, but I mean, there's plenty of time for questions.
Thanks a million, Claire. That was fascinating. Really, really was. I have a couple of comments or questions here. So one person says, this is fascinating, thank you. Is this approach, which looks at the emotional aspect of archaeology, broadly accepted within the archaeology community? I know you mentioned there is a body of work in this area, but interested to know whether it's similar to natural sciences, where considering emotional dimension is less valued.
Yeah, no, it's become really, like, absolutely, especially in England. It's basically accepted now at this stage. It's been integrated with loads of different projects, and you even have the Heritage and Wellbeing Working Group that's been set up. It's co-led by Historic England and the Council for British Archaeology. There's been numerous conferences at archaeological, or numerous sessions on it at archaeological conferences. We even had one there in Trinity a couple of weeks ago. So it's just kind of snowballing, and yeah, I think you know, there's been work done on policy as well. There's loads of kind of recommendations made from Historic England's work. So I think, yeah, we're at the point where it's accepted. I think our issue now is more about kind of well, actually, yeah, in the archaeological world it's accepted, but it's more about the metrics for well-being, economics, and kind of higher level government people are struggling with, and but that's never easy to do anyway.
Okay. Another person asks, were all the engagements in groups? Was the sense of community and collective experience analyzed as part of the work?
No, I didn't do it as part of my project. So I think yeah, I think it was more, even though we went out in groups, it was more about their individual experiences while we were walking. And then when we came together to discuss it, people did share similar. I think that the conversation actually did create sort of a sense of community and communal experience. But generally, yeah, it was more about the individual work. And actually the conference at Trinity was focused more on community well-being. So there's that's a very kind of embryonic area, and we need to understand how do you measure community well-being, all this kind of thing. But there's I think there are definitely there's something in it for sure. But I think it just needs a lot more research around it, basically.
Okay. Another question here. Is there any structure or funding to support this approach in Ireland? I know you did your PhD in the UK. Is there funding to do that work in Ireland?
Yeah, I think through universities there is. I think you can probably do it through most of the research funding that we get here if it's in the humanities. And I'm sure there are, if you're looking more at like actual clinical studies, you could do it through medical funding streams. In terms of more kind of community-based projects, I feel like the Heritage Council would support something like that, but I don't think there's been a fund made available as such. Now, at the same time, in the Heritage 2030 kind of report that was done by the government, they have said absolutely we need to we recognize that heritage supports well-being, and we want to do more research into this area, and we want to support more projects and studies. So, and also the Heritage Council's recent strategy document has also said similar things. So I think things are on the way. I think it's just slow to happen. But we're kind of just at the beginning of this process as opposed to the UK. But and we'll do it in our own way. It'll be different here anyway. I think so. It'll be interesting to see how it comes together. And I'm trying to get some funding as well. So I'm going to look at maybe the well-being or the Wellcome Trust might be, but again, that's more of an academic stream. So I feel like there will be more stuff coming online, and I know that Heritage Council have hired a research lead there for that kind of thing. So
great.
Just bear with the process. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions myself, but there's another question here saying, would Claire have any suggestions on how the findings could be practically applied?
Practically applied. Yeah, I mean, I think any of it, like I was just saying, if you're just taking people out into a landscape, it's just really, using those kinds of prompts, reflective prompts. I think that is a good start in itself, that people will experience a sort of deeper connection to the archaeology and derive greater meaning from it.
Yeah.
In turn, what else? I suppose the other thing that's come out of it, I'm thinking about it at the moment, is if heritage, and particularly older ancient sites and monuments, can support this existential type of well-being, that's something that needs more research. That maybe I'm thinking maybe people who respond well to existential psychotherapy, which is all about meaning and kind of meaning, loss, those sorts of themes, bereavement, that those that maybe heritage could be a kind of formalized into a more of a clinical approach to work with people with those sorts of issues. But I also know that some work has been done in Bradford, where it's the Continuing Bonds project, where the university have taken students out, people, to look at kind of funerary objects from archaeological sites, and to use that to help them think about death and bereavement, and also it was used with clinicians as well, and they kind of agreed that actually if they were to use this in their work in end of life care, it would be really powerful, you know, for people. So there are a lot. I mean, there's so much work out there. There's just my little bit is one angle on it, and so much work has been done, like really good work has been done with like I was saying, the veterans, and for some of those people, it's changed their lives more so in the way that it brings them together with other people. There's socialization that happens to the degree that they have gone on to train in archaeology, and you know, it's become a huge part of their lives. So sorry, I'm probably rambling now. I'm not answering your question.
No, it's great. So one of the questions that I wanted to ask was, there's been damage done to a couple of high profile archaeology sites in Ireland in the last year. Do you think there's an increasing disconnection from the historic landscape, like around us? Or is there some other reason maybe for these, like a less kind of respect or a less of a connection to the past and so on?
Yeah. I think there's a bit of both. I like, this is the area I want to work in next, because I feel on some level that we are disconnected from our heritage. I think some of us, probably the people in the room here, are obviously quite the opposite. There are a lot of us who aren't, and who are actively trying to promote it and engage with it. But I think, you know, I don't have numbers, but I think there are a lot of people who are disconnected, especially if you live in a city. But as to why people are damaging monuments more, like there's been an increase since the COVID restrictions, and this is not just in Ireland; it's been in the UK as well, where I don't know. I think people are disenfranchised, and you know, especially when people were maybe not working, or they weren't at school while they were, you know, during COVID, maybe they were just at a loose end, and kind of it was there, and they, for whatever reason, took out their frustrations. It's a really hard question to ask. So I think there is a kind of a societal thing generally, or a global thing happening, you know, where people are feeling disenfranchised, and for some reason heritage is bearing the brunt of it. But on another level, I do think that we're disconnected, and probably for a whole host of different reasons, that it's something we need to work on as a country.
And one just last question, I suppose, climate change, the biggest issue of our time. Is there any way that interacting with the historic landscape can play a role in like encouraging behavioral change, or in easing climate anxiety, or anything around that area?
I think, well, we're so the project I'm on at the moment is the Irish Peatland Archaeology Across Time project, and part of that work is to gather together, to collate all the excavation data that we have for the Bord na Móna peatlands, where industrial extraction took place, and then to build the narratives from that. But also, to the other my part of the project is really engaging people with those narratives, or just making them more aware of peatland archaeology, because it's something that has, speaking of disconnection, that we've been totally disconnected from, because of, you know, economic and industrial reasons. So we've been looking at, like, to take bogs, for example. So that's an area where we're trying to, you know, restore bogs, re-wet them, rehabilitate them, so that that they're sequestering more carbon. And one of the ways that we're kind of hoping to help people think differently about that is to look at how they were worked, that how people lived with them in the past. So if you go into the prehistoric period, people were building trackways across them, all sorts of things, going out to, pick reeds to go and thatch their roofs with. They were maybe going out to hunt wildfowl. So yes, they were still extracting, but not to the same degree. I think we can use those sorts of narratives to think different. And like, they were cutting down loads of trees for, for building and so they weren't, again, back to this idea, they weren't these, amazing, sustainable people, but it's just a way of looking at a use of the bog that is more sustainable and might help us to think differently about how we engage with it in the present. And I think, again, and I've written something on this recently where even using the nostalgic kind of projections that people have on saying, oh, maybe the past was more sustainable, even just using that and having conversations around that, and understanding how people did use landscape, either, in a good way or a bad way in the past, I think can be useful for the environment. Yeah.
Okay, thanks a million, Claire. That was really fascinating. Thanks to everybody who attended, and we will say good night. So we will be back next month with another wonderful Wednesday webinar. Okay, so good night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.